Frontline is a presentation of the Documentary Consortium.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
On Sunday, as Bill Clinton directed his bus caravan into Washington, he had almost completed his transition to power, the final ordeal on the road to the White House. In the last few weeks, he had begun to understand what it means to be the president, and the country began to understand what kind of president he might be. Tonight on Frontline, inside the Clinton transition.
Putting together a government in 10 weeks is an enormously complicated task.
Correspondent Hodding Carter examines the challenges of forming a new government.
It is probably the most important period of his administration. A president who doesn't realize that can wake up to find the future of his administration has already been determined.
I think compared to this, the election was easy. This is really hard.
Tonight, Clinton takes over. This is Frontline, a special report.
Little Rock, Arkansas, November 3rd, 1992. Governor Bill Clinton accepts his once improbable victory, a victory that could become a political watershed. At the end of the Cold War, Americans had voted for change.
My fellow Americans,
Voted for a new generation and a new politics.
on this day, with high hopes and brave hearts, in massive numbers, the American people have voted to make a new beginning.
His victory was built on his promises to fix the American economy and to attack a host of domestic problems.
The need to reform the political system, to offer young people the opportunity to borrow the money they need to go to college, the government to give us a new health care system, those on welfare, new opportunity, and the challenge to move to work. We ask companies to take the incentives we offer to put American people to work and export American products, not American jobs. That is what we offer, and that is what tomorrow we will begin to work to provide to all of you.
The rhetoric was familiar, but on this day, everything else had changed for Bill Clinton. Yesterday, he was the contender, calculating what promises Americans wanted to hear. Now, he was the next president, with many promises to keep. Yesterday, he was the man from hope, encouraging us to believe in a brighter future. Now, he was the man to whom we had turned over that future and our hopes.
Bill Clinton moved into the no man's land that lies between election and inauguration, we would begin to glimpse some answers to the persistent questions about this new president. Could he actually grow the economy, cut the deficit, and finance fresh solutions to old problems? Was he really a new kind of Democrat, an outsider who could bend the party factions and the Washington establishment to his will? And given the inevitable gap between high expectations and sober reality, would he still be able to redeem his promises and perhaps redeem politics itself?
The morning after the election. It is the first day of Bill Clinton's transition to the White House. 11 short weeks to select his cabinet and other key officials, to set his priorities, and to transform campaign promises into legislation that will make them real. And on this, his first morning as president-elect, he will discover that his life has suddenly changed. As he tries to walk from the governor's mansion to a nearby neighbor's house, he is engulfed by some of the 3,000 reporters and photographers who have come to Little Rock.
Governor, did you talk to Mr. Yeltsin today, sir? Ow!
To escape, he finally retreats to a limousine to drive 5 blocks to visit with his old friends. At campaign headquarters, Clinton's staff is also discovering that public interest has suddenly magnified dramatically. 31-year-old George Stephanopoulos will continue in his role as Clinton's chief spokesman during the transition and is hoping for a White House job.
How many hours of sleep did Governor Clinton get last night? What did he have for breakfast?
It's a new world. I think he slept for about 5.5 hours, and I have no idea what he had for breakfast.
Obviously, winning is fantastic. I mean, a lot of us never thought we'd be here. But this is a very strange phase. You know, the election's over, but the work hasn't really begun. Everybody is literally in transition, not only their own personal lives, but they're moving and wondering what job they're going to get. And there's a whole new pace to the work, and we're not doing what we're used to be doing. So, you know, it's kind of an awkward phase.
Yesterday, this was the nerve center of the Clinton campaign. Now, an unanswered telephone rings for hours. For the new administration in waiting, the lofty job of changing the government begins with the mundane, changing offices.
Hey, well, I mean, off the record, the last Democratic administration didn't do a very good job of that.
31-year-old Dee Dee Myers is also staying on as the transition press secretary.
Clinton Gore Transition Office.
Well, I have seen the request.
We estimated we were probably getting 800 phone calls a day with a pared-down staff and no one else in the building still available to take calls. And the policy people were gone and the war room was gone, and there was very little to talk about in terms of what was happening, yet a lot of interest, and so there was a hungry beast sort of beaten on the door every single day. Every single thing Bill Clinton does is of public interest now. What he had for breakfast, how far he ran, what his cat's doing. One of the big stories now is Socks the cat.
Socks reared his or her head during the period where there was absolutely nothing going on there. It shows you how foolish we can be in our pursuit of any news nugget that Socks becomes a story.
Boston Globe political reporter Curtis Wilkie, who covered Clinton's presidential campaign, is also the reporter for this program.
Photographers were luring the cat off of the grounds of the mansion with entreaties of catnip or whatever, and Clinton became infuriated that his cat's being molested and issues orders to cease and desist. And there's this wonderful picture. It's on the front page of every paper in the country of 6 or 8 still photographers in every kind of position known to Marilyn Chambers taking pictures of this cat. And it's the first cat. We haven't had a first cat since Jimmy Carter days.
Don't touch the cat!
While Socks is dominating the front page, the new president-elect is closeted with his aides, making the early decisions of his new administration. In his first major appointments, Clinton asked the former high-ranking State Department official, Warren Christopher, to be director of his transition.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Huh? You all right?
And the Washington lawyer, lobbyist, and civil rights veteran Vernon Jordan to be chairman. These men are the first signal that Clinton intends to use the Democratic establishment as an instrument of change. And 1 week into the transition, Clinton gives the first sign of how he will handle some of his more controversial promises.
As he was leaving, a reporter came up to him and said, Governor, are you still going to stand by your pledge to lift the ban on gays and lesbians in the military?
We've got a study which says that a lot of gays are performing with great distinction in the military.
Well, boom. Sure, he had made that pledge along with thousands of others during the campaign, but now he was reaffirming it as president-elect, and the next morning he woke up and found it leading the New York Times.
From ABC,
that pledge is already turning into Clinton's first political hot potato.
This is that as president, the problems just keep on coming. Tonight, it's gays in the military.
Military leaders like General Colin Powell believe that sentiment against gays is so strong that Clinton's promise will cause an uproar and wholesale resignations.
Within days, Clinton says he intends to move more slowly on the issue than he had originally promised.
On the issue of gays in the military, I I've made no decision on a timetable except that I want to firmly proceed, and I want to do it after consulting with military leaders.
I think that was a classic example of the first day Clinton discovered he was president.
And I would like to say that I think that Senator Nunn's point.
KARN News Time is 6:32.
President-elect Bill Clinton flies to Washington today, his first post-election trip.
2 weeks after the election, the Clinton camp switches into its more comfortable campaign mode to take a victory lap in Washington.
Obviously, the president had called Governor Clinton and invited him to Washington, and Governor Clinton really wanted to do that. He wanted to go and pay his respects and listen to what the president had to say. It was a pretty amazing feeling as we pulled up in the circular drive there at the White House, and the president came down the walk and extended his hand and walked into the Rose Garden. But there was also a feeling of being sort of the uninvited relative at Thanksgiving dinner or something, you know.
As President-elect was being greeted by President Bush, Warren Christopher and I, we were going through the Southwest Gate in another vehicle. And I touched Chris and I said to him, how sweet it is. And it is sweet. But that can be only momentary joy because the awesome responsibility of transition was upon us.
I think the Georgia Avenue trip was amazing. We went right from the White House out into a sort of working class commercial residential district where people haven't seen a president in a couple of generations.
I will be there. I'll be right there. Wait, I'll be right there. I'm coming back. Talking to people around the country about how we can set up in every community of any size in the country a community development bank. You're a lovely girl. Thank you so much. Congress to make some changes in the health care laws of the country. One of which will be, may I give these flowers to my wife tonight? The only reason your rates are higher is that your risk is out there all on their own. I'll be right there. I'll be there.
There are two Bill Clintons. This man has two sides to his politics. He has the Georgia Avenue side of his politics, the populist politician, very comfortable out there with the people, representative in the voice of the downtrodden and the lower middle class. And then there is the Bill Clinton who the very next night was at Pamela Harriman's cocktail party, the mover and shaker, the Arkansas governor who had totally networked to the investment banks and the Oxford community and the leading academic institutions. And there are two sides to this man's politics, and there's a bit of a tension between the two, and it'll be fascinating to watch how it unfolds. But the snapshot was right there in that first visit to Washington.
This night in Georgetown, Bill Clinton is also sending the signal that he will not repeat the mistakes he believes were made by the last Democratic president. When Jimmy Carter's Georgians moved to Washington, they came as outsiders, determined to rescue the government from the power brokers. They avoided the Georgetown elite and frayed their ties with Democratic leaders in Congress.
Clinton is almost a quintessential Washington insider. This is a guy who went to school here. He loves the city. He had come up here in Boys Nation. He had met John Kennedy at the Rose Garden, was fascinated by the city, fascinated by power that it exudes. He has been dealing with people in the Democratic Party, been dealing with administrations, with the bureaucracy, with members of Congress, with leaders of his party, ever since 1978 when he was this wunderkind who had been elected governor of Arkansas.
On this trip, Hillary Clinton makes her first major public appearance since the election, amid continuing speculation about her future role.
In this case, I think we don't have a teacher or a nurse or a doctor. We have a lawyer, maybe a killer lawyer as First Lady. And that's the first time we've ever had that.
Time magazine correspondent Margaret Carlson covered the Clintons throughout the presidential campaign.
I think it's going to work, surprisingly, very much like other First Ladies have worked. It will evolve into something more because she's schooled in public policy and she's a player in this field. But there are ceremonial duties. She's got to do them. She's got the president's ear. He seeks out her opinion. She's the smartest person he knows.
I think the trip was wildly successful. I don't think we could have ever hoped that it would go any better than it did. There's a sense, it's like the liberation. It's exactly what it's like. The occupation has ended. We've taken the halls of Congress back. We've taken the White House back. It was quite a remarkable couple of days.
Meanwhile, at transition headquarters in Little Rock, the Clinton government is growing.
After the election, on the following Monday, we got about 30,000 letters. Since then, we've probably gotten about 15,000 to 20,000 letters a day. They're sending us their input on economic issues, on policy. I want you to consider my ideas. Please let me consult with you, that kind of thing. And we're getting lots of resumes.
The resumes are forwarded overnight to the newly created transition headquarters in Washington. It's the only part of this office that's really functioning yet.
Every letter gets a response. They're all entered into the system. They're like our little babies. We try not to lose one single one of them.
Start entering these.
It's been 12 years, really 16 years, since the Democrats have put a government in place. So, you know, we have to change the whole thing around, and it will take a number of months to do it, but on January 21st, we'll have the government functioning, in my judgment, and it'll be functioning with top-flight Americans who are interested in making it work.
It took a long time to get this nameplate. I mean, this is glamour and status.
Just so the name's spelled right.
That's right. So please come in. We have an awful lot of space.
Robert Reich from Harvard, a Clinton classmate at Oxford, has just been asked to head the transition's economic planning team.
The economic plan calls for approximately $20 billion of new infrastructure spending. Roads, bridges, airports, highways, new sewage treatment systems to make up for a tremendous lack in this country relative to other countries, relative to what we used to have.
Hello, this is Stacy.
Gene, I talked to our favorite president-elect this morning, and he wants to meet with us next Tuesday in Washington, so that he...
Clinton has asked Reich to take a hard look at the real size of the federal budget and the deficit.
I think it's good. It's encouraging that we're going to have that kind of time. What we're trying to do is lay the groundwork for the chief economic officer of the Clinton administration, named Bill Clinton, to make some decisions, to get the best numbers he possibly can, the most accurate numbers, the baseline of where that budget actually is, what that deficit looks like, and also at the same time give him some options with regard to implementing his economic plan, his economic program.
As the Reich team begins to crunch the numbers, they will soon discover they must prepare the new president for another collision between promises and reality. 3 weeks after the election, with the leadership of his transition team in place, Bill Clinton takes a break, heading for a post-Thanksgiving vacation in California. But his first stop is a courtesy call to another president.
I think if they've modeled themselves after anyone, it's not Jimmy Carter, it's not any other Democratic president, it's Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, who had a very narrow, tightly focused agenda to deal with the budget and tax issues and left everything else.
Thank you. What a wonderful gift. I love it. I'll need them.
There are interesting lessons to be drawn from the Reagan administration for the Clinton people. And it's basically that you can sort of reinvent things and you can create a new era or appear to. But if you haven't dealt with the basic problems, it's going to catch up with you.
Kevin Phillips is a conservative political consultant and analyst.
And it's easy to imagine that the same way you had supply side one under Ronald Reagan, which turned out to be a trap, you could have supply side two, public supply side, this new investment, which used to be called government spending, but which now has a great new name for a new era. All of this new eramanship that you can take from Ronald Reagan could be a trap for this administration, the way it was a trap for the Reagan people.
In Washington, by early December, the signs are everywhere that a new president is coming.
There's nothing like this. It's like putting on the Olympics in 60 days.
37, 38, 39, 40 event production companies.
At Clinton's inaugural headquarters, planning for the $20 million event has all the confusion of the presidential campaign itself.
Ridiculous.
Basically, all I'm looking for is, can they march with the discipline? Do they sound good?
Catering people, lighting and sound, handicap services, people with tents, people with balloons and flowers. Comes in every day. Stacks of mail. It's fine.
In Little Rock, Governor Clinton and a small group of advisors are sifting through hundreds of possibilities to fill the top posts in the new administration.
There's an awful lot of pressure, certainly on the part of the media, to find out what's going on. We cannot have that create tensions for this process of putting together government. This is very serious business. I think compared to this, the election was easy. This is really hard. It's hard because it is looking for the best and the brightest. It's also saying no to some of the most faithful and the most committed. It is also making sure that it looks like America. So there are a lot of demands in this process.
In the month since the election, there have been no cabinet appointments.
Forced to do it. On that last point, have any offers gone out and you're just waiting to hear back or anything like that? Or...
How many questions do you guys want to ask that you know that we're not going to answer? Is this like a
just one
tally?
All day long we've been trying to put down rumors that Clinton's ready to announce his entire economic team. We're just not ready. So all day long you're dealing with rumors and innuendo.
Yeah, it would be a genuine opportunity for input from different people. But
I think the only thing that people will judge this transition by is by the strength of the administration. I think Clinton's going to pass that test. I think all of this turmoil that we're going through right now doesn't mean squat in the final analysis.
Okay, let's get started. Gene, you want to take us through where we are with the procedure with the presenters?
So we're going to try to do a run through at 3 o'clock. Actually do the slides.
Oh, is that? Okay.
And actually have a couple of us play Clinton and Gore, even maybe asking.
As everyone waits for the cabinet announcements, the transition is planning a major economic conference. It could provide the first clues of Clinton's intentions on the economy and the budget deficit.
The pressures are enormous. There is always the fear that you're going to do something wrong that may turn out to be a very large something wrong once the administration gets going.
This meeting? Yes. So I can read something tonight?
Our job is to, at the very least, make sure the numbers are right.
And the numbers Reich's economic team has pulled together are sobering. The federal budget deficit that Clinton has promised to cut in half by 1996 is actually $100 billion bigger than he had acknowledged during the campaign.
Oh, sorry. He knew that he was going into an economic summit. He had to make decisions about the budget, and he wanted to make sure everything was as scrupulous, as careful as numbers can be. And I went back into it, and it was pretty clear. It didn't take a rocket scientist to see that the baseline, that is, the projected deficit, had got worse from over the summer, really, from the time that the original package, putting people first, had been created.
Well, just to be blunt about it, hadn't those numbers gotten worse before you started to pull them together? I mean, wasn't it fairly clear?
There was, I believe, an August estimate that showed that those numbers had got worse. And I know there's been a lot of press speculation about who knew what and when and how. I can tell you that from where I sat, nobody knew anything, or at least were not focusing on anything.
On December 7th, as Clinton arrives back in Washington, the first thing on his agenda is a private session at Blair House with Reich and other economic advisors. Time magazine correspondent Michael Kramer pieced together what happened at the meeting.
about 7 of the economic staff members who were there to present some of the graphs that would explain what they were about to talk about. What they did talk about was the changing Congressional Budget Office forecasts, which meant that the deficit would be worse, both immediately and after 4 years than anticipated. The fact that Congress, having failed to appropriate increased funds for the savings and loan bailout, would put them in a further hole.
And his reaction?
Number one, he is upset at something that he suspected and that he had actually discussed with some of his people beforehand, which is that his own numbers were the product of some pie-in-the-sky calculations by his staff during the campaign. And his second reaction was one of kind of semi-exhilaration in the sense that he was actually going to face a greater challenge than he thought. He told me, this is my first political crisis. And I think it is. It's also a public relations crisis.
I based my whole campaign on my absolute conviction that the fundamental economic problems of this country are long-term problems that have been 20 years in the making, that have led us to the situation
It's
now
something
where
that anybody who followed Clinton closely picked up on right away, that there had been this sea change in his public attitude toward the economy. He began talking about long-term problems. He began talking about the need to reduce the deficit. And you cease to hear about the centerpiece of his campaign, you know, the education program to provide college education for every American, the national service program, programs that cost money.
And I think there is broad consensus among the people with whom I talk that we have to have a long-term deficit reduction program, that you'll never get it if you don't do something about health care costs, and that at any rate we have to deal with these issues, and they overwhelm all other considerations.
It was inconvenient for Clinton during the campaign to admit that the deficit would be as bad as it now obviously will be. And I think he knew there was a fair chance that it would be. But if he acknowledged those numbers, it would force him into a different mathematics of what he could do in terms of new investment, tax cuts for the middle class, and so forth. Now he's forced to confront this reality, but the difficulty is that I think he's surprised by a little bit of it. I really think that the deficit has emerged as more of a problem than he thought it would.
Hello, Todd. How are you? You look beautiful.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving this up to me, Roger.
Backstage in Little Rock, Clinton's first cabinet appointments are greeted with excitement by their friends and families. Again, Clinton has turned to the Democratic establishment for the leadership of his economic team. The new Treasury Secretary, 71-year-old Lloyd Bentsen, chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and Congressman Leon Panetta, the new director of the Office of Management and Budget. The two men are hard-headed about the need for serious deficit reduction, and both have the political skill to push an economic program through Congress. But there are also some fresh faces with new ideas, like Robert Reich, a surprising pick for Secretary of Labor.
I had been away from my family for a couple of months, already doing 12-hour days, just in the center of a cyclone on the transition. And was even, I think I can be very honest about it. I mean, you know, I was even kind of looking forward to getting out of this and going home. On the other hand, it's a terrific challenge, and I was absolutely delighted when he asked.
By mid-December, Governor Clinton's two-day economic conference has grown into a major media event.
It's going to be televised on C-SPAN, the whole thing, and broadcast on NPR. I think it's the kind of thing people will listen to in bits and chunks. I don't think that there'll be anything but junkies sitting in front of that TV for 2 days. But Governor Clinton and Al Gore are going to sit there. And I think
they're going to love every minute.
They're going to love every minute of it. They're two policy wonks at heart. It's like going to Disneyland for them.
One of the dozens of corporate CEOs attending the conference is John Sculley, the chairman of Apple Computer.
Well, I think this is a terrific opportunity for
the president-elect to begin to focus the country's attention.
Scully has come to Little Rock to press his plans for education reform, the same ideas he took to Washington 4 years ago during the Bush transition.
I think you could seize the high ground very early in your administration and be able to inspire the American people that you really are going to become the education president. What you do need to do is you need to inspire a broad sector of our society, industry, government, educators.
Either I didn't do a very good job of presenting it or the message wasn't well understood. But in any event, there was no follow-through on what I suggested 4 years ago.
Nice to see you.
You're welcome.
Well, I appreciate very much the spirit of this visit. No, it's exactly what I need to have to stay focused.
President Bush, started to put together his own education plans. Remember, he was the education president. I never got a phone call. We never heard from them again. Our real income is down, and it's only the people who are better educated with higher incomes that have been able to hold their own.
This year, Scully, a registered Republican, supported Bill Clinton.
As you know, I basically share your analysis of this problem.
There's no question that Bill Clinton not only grasped what we're talking about, he's been a part of the process of creating it.
Thank you very much. First of all, this forecast reflects the consequences of lower growth rates.
The new president was getting high marks for his two-day economic marathon, for his willingness to listen, for his detailed command of the facts and the issues.
An annual surplus as against annual Social Security expenses. I think it's something on the order of $70 billion this year. Is that about right?
You watch him at the Economic Summit and you think, boy, he's smart. Boy, he has a great grasp of these issues. And that's good. Just always be aware that there's showmanship to that, too. That he's always considering the political ramifications because he is a consummate politician.
John Brummett of the Arkansas Times has covered Clinton's political career in Arkansas.
He also will finesse issues. I'm sorry that the Slick Willie nickname became Sleazy Willie, because in Arkansas, a lot of people didn't mean it that way. They just meant this guy's good. This guy can finesse his way through a minefield.
The next presentation is on the federal deficit, and it will be made by John White, who was
The minefield Clinton was now negotiating was his campaign promise to cut the federal deficit in half.
So, like a clever politician, he confects, I guess is a better word, a series of well-orchestrated events during which the public is coming to understand that this promise is not fulfillable, beginning with the economic conference in Little Rock, and the use of John White, who had been Ross Perot's guy, to basically say, gee, things are really bad.
Unfortunately, President-elect Clinton and Vice President-elect Gore, I have to report to you today that the more recent forecasts show a significant deterioration of this situation.
And Clinton, at that point, to say, they are really, bad? The data was given to John. The graphs that he used in Little Rock were some of the very ones that the president-elect had been shown a week earlier at Blair House. It was a setup, and it worked very well.
I think the economic conference in general was an attempt to begin something that I think Clinton is going to try to do, which is change the yardstick by which we judge presidents. What he's basically saying is, friends, the cyclical yardstick, the short-term yardstick for success cannot apply to my presidency, he is trying to convince us, because the problems I face are long-term. They stretch beyond 1, 2, 4, or maybe even 8 years. Therefore, I want to try to educate you to think about our problems differently and therefore judge my presidency differently, not short-term, in much longer terms.
Hit it, Matt.
Okay, not a whole lot yet. Aides to President-elect Clinton say he's lined up 3 more top members of his administration, filling cabinet posts for education, housing, and Veterans Affairs. This comes to us through the Associated Press.
Do you think we should just put a sign on the front door that says, "The Civ"?
At the morning staff meeting in Little Rock, it is clear the transition has entered another minefield. The pressure is growing for Clinton to appoint more women to his cabinet.
Cabinet choices.
Ricky, we're going to get hit on the women appointments today. We'll definitely get hit. Can we check out one thing for sure? There's this
report going around that Bush had 4 women in his cabinet at the same time.
I'll just triple check it, but last night I talked to people about it, and that was, we only came up with 3.
So they don't count any of ours, but they count.
And they're counting 4 as, I mean, over time.
Oh, well, over time, but they're never, okay, so the statement that Bush had 4 cabinet officials at the same time is not true.
Today, I am announcing the appointment of 3 more top officials to our administration.
So far, only one woman has been appointed to the cabinet and 3 others to top posts.
They will now address
But on this
in the
day,
government.
as Clinton announces
Devoting
2
their lives
more
to public
male
service
members of
and
his
finding
cabinet
creative
in
solutions
Washington,
to the problems of
Vernon
others.
Jordan is meeting with a coalition of women's groups unhappy about the lack of women. 3 of the women who met with Jordan said they were very direct about their expectations.
I can count. And in America, women are 51% of the population and 54% of the electorate. And so I would say of the requisite number of jobs in any given pool, we ought to be at least half.
I'm not sure that we can maximally satisfy every constituent group, blacks, white men, Jews, women, Hispanics. There are not that many slots. I do believe, on the other hand, that when this process is over, in terms of the quality of people that we have selected and in terms of the fact that it will look like America in ways that no other cabinet has looked like, consistent with Bill Clinton's promise, I think that we will have, we can make our case.
I think like everything else in life, the proof is in the pudding, and you are measured by your results. And if indeed what happens at the end is that not only the cabinet tier of jobs look like America, but that the sub-cabinet is as diverse as America, that extraordinary process that they've put in place will have worked. And if it doesn't, it will be a giant flop.
Voice and the vision.
4 days later, when Clinton announces more cabinet selections, they include a surprise. Hazel O'Leary is the new Secretary of Energy.
They're not talking about the sub-cabinet because there were 3 women in the Bush cabinet and 3 women in the Reagan cabinet, and they say they want to break the glass ceiling. Do you expect that there will be more than 3?
Yes, I do, but I think it's interesting that for purposes that they're playing quota games and math games, and they have diminished the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors and the director of the Environmental and Protection Agency, and they would have been counting those positions against our administration, those bean counters who are doing that, if I had appointed white men to those positions. And you know that's true. I have nothing else to say about this issue. Wolf?
He invited the whole question of bean counting. He's the one who brought bean counting to the table. And it was a commendable thing. I mean, having a cabinet that looks like America, that represents a lot of different groups, that's a good thing. But it's a question of how you handle it, how much influence you allow these groups to have in shaping that diversity. And I think that they ended up having a great deal of influence, probably more than he wanted, more than he would have accepted. And at the end, he blew his stack because I think he felt he had almost lost control of the process.
But Bill Clinton meets his goal, a full cabinet by Christmas. The final appointments include his Attorney General, Zoe Baird, the first woman ever appointed to such a high-ranking and sensitive post.
I'm greatly honored by this designation.
I would say this cabinet is to politics what Noah's Ark was to the flood. There's not quite 2 of everybody, but you've got a couple of political payoffs. You've got a few people named for diversity, you've got a few people named for their fresh ideas, and you've got a few people named because their skills in a smoke-filled room.
This is for you.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
It's possible that in the end it'll be written on his political tombstone that he did this, that he represented every Democratic interest group around, and it bogged him down. On the other hand, it may be that you can't deal with Washington unless you've got people like Lloyd Bentsen and Leon Panetta in there, and that could be the saving grace. But I think this is really the linchpin of how he's going to be judged. Is he correct in assuming that you can take what exists in the Democratic Party and make something new out of it with Bill Clinton as the catalyst.
Talking about NAFTA, and I think
January 7th, 8 a.m. in Little Rock. With less than 2 weeks to go before the inauguration, the tension at transition headquarters is rising. There have been no new appointments since Christmas. The White House jobs many of these young staffers are expecting have still not been announced.
According to the Washington Post, it says, as expected, Transition Communication Director George Stephanopoulos will hold that post in the White House. Campaign official Paul Begala may be a senior deputy to George, while Press Secretary Dee Dee Myers is likely to stay in that job.
And it is clear that Bill Clinton's plate is becoming very full.
Pretty much there's across-the-board reports about Bush's ultimatum to him, projections for larger deficits, health plan cuts, mass flight by Haitians, pledge for 25% staff cut, heads of Jewish groups, Saddam's moving missiles into the no-fly zone. But the big story that received coverage in here, or I should say that would affect here, is George Bush's budget, the things being much worse than we thought, and the way we dealt with it. I want to give you a little idea of how the coverage went. Britt Hume talked about how
the arrival of boxfuls of the Bush administration's abbreviated last budget was anything but satisfying. It projects a deficit next year $20 billion larger than was forecast last July and larger still in the years ahead.
Hume then unleashed the zinger, and I don't know how many of you saw this in your evening news summary. This was the governor talking about jobs. He said, if you listen carefully, though, you could hear the sound of a campaign promise seemingly being abandoned. Specifically, the promise Clinton made about his economic plans. And it cut to the governor saying,
it will create millions of jobs and cut the deficit by more than 50% in 4 years.
Gene, there's going to be a lot of follow-up on this deficit stuff today.
There was some confusion among the press corps on the numbers yesterday, to say the least.
Yeah,
it was very a lot. It was very amusing.
It's because only Gene understands why it's $50 to $60 billion higher.
Their public reaction was to jump on it, okay? Here's now our real opening. Bush says the budget deficit's going to be $60 to $70 billion higher than he said last July in the middle of the campaign. We told you they were camouflaging the figures. Now we've got the smoking gun. Now you've got to understand, American people, why I, Bill Clinton, might have to break some of my campaign promises to have the budget deficit in half in 4 years, to have a middle-class tax cut. The medicine is going to be harsh, and it may indeed have to be harsher than I thought. You only get one chance to blame your predecessor. This is it. Go for it.
The day after the Bush budget is released, Clinton and his new economic team meet in Little Rock to grapple with the conflict between their promise of new infrastructure investment and their promise to cut the deficit.
The fact that they have to deal with this, I think they know in their bones this is bad stuff for a Democrat. This is not what the Democratic Party has ever made a success out of. This is stuff that has pulled down the Democratic Party. They're going to try to carry water on both shoulders to have new ideas and new programs at the same time as they face this horrible legacy. And I think he's rightly torn, but I do sense he's not as on top of it as perhaps he ought to be.
The next day, for the first time, Clinton demonstrates publicly that he has become engaged in the other half of the presidency, foreign policy. He flies to Austin to see Mexico's President Salinas. This is Clinton's first meeting with a foreign leader since the election. The two men have come together to discuss the new North American Free Trade Agreement. But on this day, about to become the leader of the last superpower, Bill Clinton has a whole world to think about.
Bill Clinton had to be sitting there, drumming his fingers on the table, thinking as his mind drifted away during the Spanish translation, that I could have 3 wars on my hands, the Balkans, Somalia, and Iraq, by the day I take office.
And how do you feel right now about the possibility that in about 45 minutes this ultimatum will have come and gone with Saddam Hussein remaining defiant?
Well, let's wait until the facts are clear tomorrow, and I expect I'll have more questions answered. The question is,
I was consulted about the problem of the violations.
Clinton has promised to be the chief economic officer of his new administration and to focus like a laser beam on the economy. But is that possible?
I agreed with the action.
I think that we're entering a phase in world affairs, for instance, where just being president for foreign affairs would be a full-time job and a half. Take the last 3 days over the question of whether Saddam Hussein is playing cat and mouse with his missiles in the no-fly zone. This could take up a whole day, a whole week, a whole month. And Saddam Hussein, he's got nothing else to do but to play the yo-yo of Bill Clinton for a while. Oh, they're here. Oh, they're there. Oh, I'm so sorry. You're busy, Bill? It's the Middle East, stupid.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the world today. Iraq is sort of being belligerent with their missiles. There's a lot of decisions he needs to make about the transition as the inauguration date approaches. But that's part of being president. You can't focus on any one thing to the exclusion of other things.
Congress may give him a honeymoon, the world will not. Bill Clinton will have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And he will have to walk fast and chew a lot of gum, given the nature of the world and the nature of the domestic problems. He says he can. Time will tell.
With no further ado, I'd like to hand it off to Harry Thompson.
With just a week to go until the inaugural, preparations in Washington are in high gear. For organizers like Hollywood producer Harry Thompson, the buzzwords are inclusiveness, diversity, and stars.
We have brought in talent from around the country that are going to be playing in these tents free. Barbara Streisand, Aretha Franklin. I know we're having a reunion of Fleetwood Mac, the gala, and it's, of course, telecast on CBS. The arrival event in Washington, of course, will be televised on HBO. We sold the rights to these two shows to Disney. The political parts, we're giving that to any news organization who wants to carry it. Bill Cosby, Jack Lemmon, the astronauts aboard the Endeavour will ring a bell, and Thelonious, Dizzy Gillespie, and I've forgotten who all. I'm sorry.
But in Little Rock, in these last days of the process, the Clinton transition seems to have lost its momentum.
So most of the personal stuff we'll just send back to the White House, like all the stuff in like the personal files.
It's just junk. I mean, it's great junk, but it's campaign mementos.
Alien back to Clinton, not even that. That's like his first like intergalactic meeting. I mean that symbol, that's like represents a lot.
In the week before the inaugural, the young Clinton staffers still do not know what jobs they may get. Hundreds of White House and sub-cabinet slots are still unfilled. And the economic plan, which Clinton had once promised to deliver to Congress before the inauguration, is developing more slowly.
In almost every way, this has been the most difficult period. I don't think anyone's sorry to see it drawing to a close.
Today, as we prepare to leave for Washington to launch a new administration, there are several announcements to make.
But finally, Clinton and his chief of staff reveal their White House choices.
In the Office of Communications, George Stephanopoulos, Assistant to the President and Director of Communications. Dee Dee Myers, Deputy Assistant to the President and Press Secretary.
She is the first woman to become press secretary to a president.
I'm really happy. I'm really thrilled to be part of this, a little humbled by it. I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad the process is finally winding down, the whole transition process, because that's been really hard.
I think that we are taking the right position at this time. Give us a chance to see if we can make it work. I haven't even taken office yet.
In the last scheduled press conference of his transition, the full weight of the presidency seems to settle on Bill Clinton.
Furthermore, don't you think that in your campaign promise to grant asylum to Haitian refugees, you may have falsely raised their hopes that they would be given asylum here?
As far as we know, nearly 400 people died just a few days ago. And I do not want to do anything to fuel that sort of danger and perilous journey.
You indicated yesterday that given compliance with UN resolutions, you could see the possibility of normal relations with Saddam Hussein's Iraq.
I will evaluate what I do based on his conduct. I have no intention of normalizing relations with him, and I was not asked that question.
Are there any things that you talked about that you seem to promise during the campaign that you will not go back on no matter what?
Every president, as far as I know, who's held this office, and especially the ones who really did a good job, have had to answer questions like this because they had to change some of their positions in response to changing circumstances.
Can you clear up some confusion about when you'll have your economic game plan ready to go? When will it be ready?
I continue to talk with congressional leaders and to work on this, and I think we'll be raring to go and ready to go. Thank you.
When this transition began, there were some open questions about Bill Clinton, about his intentions and his political will. 77 days later, many remain. Not surprising, actually, since there is no way to be certain about what any president will do until he actually takes power. But this has been an unexpectedly bumpy transition. It has offered some tantalizing hints about a man more complex than he appeared, and has disturbed those who worry that there will be too little change rather than too much. Yet, after 30 years of faltering and fallen presidents, the public fervently wants this one to succeed. As Bill Clinton moves into the White House, that hope remains his most potent asset.
We'll do our best never to forget who put us in the White House. People like you along the roads of America. Never to forget what this election was all about, that there were too many men and women who were working hard and falling further behind, not being rewarded even though they carried the load for America, and that we could not allow our children to be the first generation of children to grow up to a future worse than their parents. That will be our guiding, driving mission as we go to Washington to face the complex and massive problems, but the great opportunities facing this country. This has been a great day. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Folks call me the Maverick. Guess I ain't too diplomatic.
There was a good feeling about the fact that change has taken place. It's like having put fresh, crisp linen on the bed. The problems are the same, and they may not be any better the morning that you get out of the bed to face them, but people have a different attitude about their problems.
Well, there's more folks than a few who share my point of view. They're worried if they're gonna sink or swim.
I think it's good that people are feeling good again about America. Now, that imposes on President-elect an enormous burden of meeting those expectations and satisfying this clamor.
Nothing venture, nothing gain. Sometimes you got to go against the grain.
But I think he has the ability to have a personal impact, to connect with the American people personally, to reconnect them to their government in a way that hasn't happened in at least a generation, maybe two. And I think that has inspired profound hope in people. I mean, they want to believe in their government again and their leaders again.